And now, it's Boomer Life, lifestyle discussion designed to make your life more engaging, meaningful, and complete. Celebrating the baby boomer generation, this is Boomer Life on CIL 650.
Well, good evening and welcome to Boomer Life here on CIL 650. Money, 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 money. Got to have it. The OJ's helping to start off this hour, and obviously we're going to be talking about money in one form or another. In fact, we're talking about debt and solutions to debt problems. And with us in studio, a couple of guests from Abakhan and Associates. They are proposal administrators and trustees in bankruptcy all over British Columbia. Always a pleasure to welcome Brett Lucken back to the studio. Brett is a trustee with Abakhan Associates. Hello.
Hey, hello there, Sterling.
Nice to have you back with us.
Thank
and
you.
You brought a guest. MeetNicoleClarke is with us from Abakhan and Associates as well. Nicole is an estate manager and an insolvency counselor. Welcome to Boomer Life for the first visit, Nicole.
Thank you.
It's good to have you with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself. What is an insolvency counselor? What do you do?
Well, if you file for a bankruptcy or a proposal, there's 2 counseling sessions, which are more like information sessions, that are required for you to obtain a certificate of discharge or full performance.
Okay.
In those sessions, we go over money management, budgeting, shopping, all sorts of aspects of credit. And then at your second counseling, it's more geared towards discharge. So we talk about rebuilding credit, understanding your credit bureau report, and things like that.
Nicole, when you organize these 2 mandatory counseling sessions, and I'm sure that they're pretty much the same formula for each couple or individual that you give them to, but my question is, do you find the information you pass along? Well, here's a budget. Here's how you do this. Here's how you manage your cash flow. You put it all down in black and white, and you develop a formula. Are you finding that a lot of the people you counsel are getting this information for what feels like or looks to you like the very first time?
Yes, quite often. And what we like to do is encourage people's spouses to come with them, or if they have teenage children, I ask for them to attend as well, so they can be open and talk about this stuff with their children as well.
Right. In the sense that parents would, I think, in some ways, like to think of shielding their children from the financial duress that we're under these days. But in some cases, they're part of the financial duress, so why shouldn't they share it? Especially if they're teenagers. If they're wee little kids, that's one thing. But if they're teenagers, they know what's going on.
Well, sometimes they don't. You know, quite often people will just say, oh, well, you don't have the money, just pay with your credit.
Right.
So they don't really understand what credit is, and you pay later, and the interest and everything associated with it.
Brett, these sessions that Nicole and you and all of your colleagues at Abakhan and Associates conduct, and they are required sessions. You've mentioned this in the past, and this is a horse you like to ride quite a bit. We are, relatively speaking, for a wealthy, prosperous Western country, we are quite desperately financially illiterate, aren't we?
Yes, yeah, we are. And in fact, you're right. This is something that I love to talk about because I feel quite strongly about this. In fact, in a previous life, I was a high school teacher. And when I say a previous life, not referring to reincarnation or anything like that.
Well, no.
But before
it's the accent.
Yeah, it's
back
the
in
accent.
South Africa, before you came to Canada.
Before I came to Canada, I was in fact a high school English teacher, and it remains bizarre to me that at the level of high school, and in fact college or anything like that, that there are no, I would say, let's call them mandatory courses, even if they're basic courses, where people can understand how credit and how debt works, and how it can affect their life. And that, it's again when people come and talk to me, I find myself telling them things, as Nicole was saying, that they've never heard before.
Right, and that's why once Nicole started talking about, well, I have to give these counseling sessions, and I thought, I'll bet you there's more than a few people who go through those sessions. Some of that rudimentary information is being heard by them for the first time.
As part of, if you're a file for a bankruptcy, one of the things you're supposed to do is give your bankruptcy trustee an income and expense form.
Sure.
Where you tell the trustee in bankruptcy how much you earn and what you spend your money on. And it's almost 90% it's true that people get that thing and have never actually done it themselves ever once in their life. So that they actually don't know. There are some people who actually don't know how much they earn. As crazy as that sounds for someone who comes to a trustee in bankruptcy with financial problems, they're actually not sure how much they earn. They're not completely positive about it. And they're also not sure where they spend their money. You'll ask them simple stuff like, what's your mortgage? And they don't immediately know the answer to that question. What's your mortgage payment every month? How much do you spend on food, just plus or minus? They haven't got a clue.
Right.
And these are things that, just basic things that I think should be taught at a much earlier age. When you're a teenager, even potentially when you're at elementary school. Just simple stuff that we just don't seem to see in our society.
I think it's a really smart idea, Nicole, when you ask adults who are in financial distress, who have teenage children, to bring them with them, to allow them to understand what the family's going through, because it's not fair if mom and dad try to shelter them from that, because they're going to be melting under the stress, and the kids are going to be just scratching their heads going, what's up with the parents? So you got to get them involved, right?
Yes, absolutely. And it also teaches them, when they have their first jobs, or even if they're younger where they get an allowance, this is how much I'm giving you per week. What are you spending it on? Are you spending it on candy, video games, etc.? And then when they start working, they can start a savings program or allocating it to something in the future that they want.
There's a story in one of yesterday's papers about cars and the way cars are marketed to particularly susceptible, young, eager would-be car drivers. And we'll get to that in a second. But I wanted to also ask you, Nicole, because you've described your activities as an insolvency counselor, but I also identified you as an estate manager. What does that mean? What do you do in that when you wear that hat?
Well, basically, I'm the right-hand woman to the trustees, and it can range from a various aspects. Basically, I could be the first person that talks to you when you call in.
Okay.
So generally, we like to, touch base and go through, what makes you feel comfortable. If you'd like to come in for an appointment,
right,
or would you feel more comfortable doing something over the phone, and go through whatever's more comfortable with you. And we talk about different options, bankruptcy, proposals to avoid bankruptcy, or even doing something informal on your own without having to use a trustee.
Okay.
And I also do all of the administration part for the trustees. I also attend court, as trustees are officers of the court.
Yes.
So if there's any sort of discharge hearing or anything like that, I would attend those.
Okay. And you're also in the program, too. Eventually, you are going to join Brett and the ranks of the other quite limited trustees in bankruptcy across Canada, correct?
Definitely, that is the goal.
It's
yes.
quite a rigorous program, isn't it?
Yes, it's quite difficult.
Multiple years. Brett, how long have you been a trustee?
I'm just finishing my second year now.
Okay.
Nicole's right. It's not a course you undertake lightly. There's a lot of learning, a lot of studying that goes into it, and it ends ultimately after a number of exams and assignments with an oral board in front of potentially a lawyer, other trustees, and a member of the Office of the Superintendent of Bankruptcy who decide whether or not you're going to get your license.
Interesting stuff. Rather an intimidating panel to sit down on in front of Nicole. She's rolling her eyes like, yeah, I can wait for that one for a few more weeks. Yeah. But, Brett, tell us what the role of a trustee is, because you are an officer of the court, as Nicole mentioned a few moments ago. I said there are a very limited number. There are fewer than 2,000 trustees in all of Canada.
I think it's actually just over 1,000. I'm not sure how many actually practice, though, so probably under 1,000 actually practice throughout Canada.
Okay, so what is it? What's the designation? What does being a trustee in bankruptcy give you permission to do that only 1,000 other people can?
The designation is CIRP, which is Insolvency Restructuring Professional. I'm Certified Insolvency Restructuring Professional.
Okay.
There I am, forgetting my own certification for a minute there. And really what that does is, other than the obvious, which makes you an officer of the court, number one, which means that pretty much any decision that you make, you have to understand may well be reviewed by a court of law at some point in the future. So that obviously creates a certain sort of bar of entry. There's a barrier where you've got to be very clear that whatever you do has a potential to be reviewed by a court. It means that ultimately you are the only professional that is licensed throughout Canada under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act to file a proposal or a bankruptcy under the Bankruptcy and Insolvency Act.
And these are court documents. They're quite official legal documents.
They're very official legal documents.
Right.
They are, in fact, ultimately filed with the regulator, which is the Superintendent of Bankruptcy, and they become court documents. And in many cases, you will find that the information that you provide it's a statement of declaration. So you in fact will swear a lot of the information that goes down there. So it's pretty serious stuff, and it is a public process. And I understand that many people that deal with us perhaps feel intimidated by the prospect of dealing with a trustee and dealing with something that comes underneath a federal government act.
Well, and I suppose the other thing, too, that would intimidate some people, because dealing with a real insolvency issue, when you're flat broke and you got the creditors coming at you and the nasty letters and the rude phone calls and all of that, the stress level just goes right up through the ceiling. And I guess a lot of people would be reluctant to come forward to an officer of the court because, well, it's going to be in the papers. My inability to manage my own blinking checkbook is going to be in the Vancouver Sun, for crying out loud.
In fact, it's funny you mention that, because that's exactly what happened to me. Just the other day I was in, where was it? Boston Pizza, because, as Sterling and you and I, we've discussed before, I spend a lot of time meeting people in all sorts of interesting places.
That's true. Have trustee will travel.
Yeah, have trustee will travel. Go wherever it makes you convenient, wherever's convenient for you, wherever makes you comfortable. So I met this couple in Boston Pizza, and in fact, that was one of the first questions they asked. Faced with the prospect of a bankruptcy, they were wondering whether or not that would mean, was this going to be in the newspaper?
Absolutely.
Are you going to be telling my employer? How's this advertised? Who's going to find out? How many people do you send this information to?
Sure.
So yes, it's very intimidating. Truthfully speaking, 90% of bankruptcies are not advertised anywhere. It is a public process. It is filed with the superintendent of bankruptcy, and if someone really wanted to find out, they could do a search and find out that you had been bankrupt. But at a practical level, everyday level, the truth is that no one gets told other than the people who you actually owe money to.
Right, it's not going to be on the bankruptcy page, C18 on the morning paper every day. Oh, there I am this week. That just doesn't happen.
No, it doesn't happen. And you know what? Now that we've painted the picture of a trustee being an officer of the court and somebody who really you giving information to, which becomes official and is ultimately you swear to that information. Having said that, on the other side, I need to point out the obvious, and that is that trustees deal with a lot of people who are highly stressed. They're in situations in their lives where they really feel like they've reached the end of the rope and they can't deal anymore. And trustees are pretty well practiced in dealing with people like that. And in fact, it's our job not to beat you up, not to make you feel like you've made some terrible mistake and now you've got to, come with the tail between your legs and figure out a solution to your problem. Our job is in fact to give you hope and to find a solution for you that'll give you an option to move to a better life, one where you're not under the overwhelming weight of the debt that you feel.
Yeah, because the last person who needs a finger-wagging scolding is the person who is the debtor, who has been suffering through this mountain of trouble. Granted, it's a self-inflicted wound in many cases, but nonetheless, by the time they get to the point where they're going to have a conversation with a pro, the last thing they need is a scolding. And
absolutely.
It's not going to happen with Abakhan.
No, and in fact, what I'd like to do is refer to a story I actually mentioned to you a little bit earlier. There was this lady that came and saw me with her sister, in fact, in her early 60s, quite recently, and she was really, really upset. She really was upset because she knew she'd got herself into too much debt. She'd used her credit cards in a way which she admitted quite openly had resulted in her accumulating far more debt than she could possibly repay.
Okay.
And when she came to see me, my job in that situation was not at all to tell her you're silly, you should never have done this whatsoever. In fact, we didn't even deal with that at all. What we really dealt with was how was she going to be able to come out the other side of this.
Right.
And in fact, I mentioned to you earlier that really the only solution for her ultimately and unfortunately was for her to sell her house. But when she sat down at the table, her first words out of her mouth virtually were, I don't want to lose my house. How do I keep my house? Mm-hmm. And then my job really was, as a professional, was to sit down and methodically and painfully work through all the options that were available to her and help her see that the way she could in fact avoid bankruptcy, avoid filing a proposal, avoid the judgments, avoid the harassing phone calls, avoid all the stress and the fact that she wasn't able to sleep at night at all anymore, was just simply then to put her house on the market, willfully herself conduct her sale, get rid of the house, extract the equity from it, pay off her debt, and then move on with her life in a way that she probably at that point in time could never believe was possible.
And even though she started the conversation off by saying, look, I don't want to lose my house, she probably knew that it was likely anyway.
Ultimately, I think what she needed to do was to talk to a professional who understood the situation and could just lay it out for her very cleanly and show her that the clever thing to do was to in order for her to move forward with her life, was to sell her house. And the reason why I tell that story really is because that's actually what our job is.
Right.
Is to sit down with you, review your financial situation, and help you find the options that are available that will help you come out the other side.
And Nicole, you said a couple of times already that you're likely, in many cases, to be the first point of contact. If someone listens to us right now on the radio here on Sea Isle says, you know, tomorrow morning, first thing tomorrow, enough of this already. They sound like kind of reasonable people. I'm going to place myself in their hands. I'm going to call them in the morning. If they call in the morning, they're probably going to get you, right?
That's true.
And when they do, a lot of people in a pretty highly wound up, stressful point in their lives, right?
Absolutely, yes.
So what do some of those conversations sound like? And how do you handle that kind of tightly wound person who really needs help?
It really depends on the caller. Like I said before, we see what's more comfortable for them, whether to have a conversation on the phone right now, schedule a time later that works better.
Or maybe have the traveling man here go out and have a coffee with them
Correct,
somewhere.
yeah. And basically, then we go from there. If they want to have a conversation right away, I generally see what works for them. Some people want to tell their whole story at first.
On the phone?
Yeah.
Okay.
And so then you listen and you write down what's relevant, and then you ask, can I ask you some questions? Or some people just don't even have a clue what to ask
Sure.
or what to say. So I just generally start with, who are your debts with? Approximately how much do you owe? What types of debts they are. Then I move to the assets. In Brett's story, that woman didn't have another choice but to sell her house. But quite often, there are other choices where you can keep your house.
Mm-hmm.
There's certain exemptions that are allowed with
Sure.
bankruptcy. So if you wanted to keep your house, you could continue to make payments with the mortgage. Then we go through what their income is and expenses briefly, and then just any other sort of decisions they've made financially that could affect what a bankruptcy or proposal would look like in their scenario.
And during this phone call, people can either volunteer all of this information, and I'm sure in some cases a sympathetic ear is just a gift from God for some callers.
Some people, yes.
And other times, I'm sure they're quite closed-mouthed about it, and, I'd rather not disclose this on the phone. I'd really rather see someone.
Yes.
And
right.
so great, come on in, right? Or we'll have Brett go see you.
And in fact, Sterling, we have a few people who call who would rather just be Jane or John Smith.
Sure.
Yes.
Of
Right.
course,
And
of
then-
course.
And they won't tell you who they are, what they do for a living, or anything like that. They just want to lay their situation out on the phone and have you feed back to them. And we're quite happy with that. If you want to be anonymous but still want to get the advice, that's fine.
Okay, so well then, let's put the website out there right now. We need to take a break anyway. Abakhan.com is the website. Abakhan is spelled ABAKHAN.com. And on the website, all the phone numbers where you can get a hold of Nicole or Brett or any of their associates. There are 5 offices across British Columbia, in Vancouver, Surrey, Victoria, Vernon, and Upcountry in Prince George. And Brett is just that kind. He'll go pretty much everywhere. He's been to the Kootenays a few times, loves
right.
Vancouver Island, no problem at all.
If you're in Hope on Wednesday, I'm there.
Abakhan.com, lots of terrific information there, including, of course, the all-important phone number. And we're back with lots more here on Boomer Life right after this.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on Sea Isle 650.